Today, we were suddenly hit with the revelation that Trump's personal attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen, recorded a conversation with Trump about payments to a former Playboy model who claimed a longtime affair, and that federal investigators now have that recording. Also today, separately, our own Reverend Al Sharpton happened to be with Michael Cohen having breakfast, a meeting which Cohen himself initiated. Cohen tweeted, quote, "I have known Reverend for almost 20 years. No one better to talk to." Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC, joins me now. Rev, good to see you. Thank you for being with us. What are the circumstances by which you came to be having breakfast with Michael Cohen today on the very same day that this news dropped?
Well, I had happened to run into him several weeks ago. We just spoke to each other because I've known him down through the years. Whenever we would have differences with Mr. Trump on social justice issues and have different, I would say, combative kind of meetings, Michael Cohen was the ones who would arrange the meeting. He was the one that would try to get all sides together, usually unsuccessfully. But he always was a straight, honest kind of person. I received a text from him several days ago saying he wanted to meet. We agreed to meet, very public restaurant where he's staying. And we talked for over an hour. And I really sensed that he was very troubled. He felt that he was being, in many ways, cast wrongly. And I feel that he was saying that he had been abandoned by Mr. Trump. He kept saying to me over and over again, "Rev, I'm going to do what's right for the country. I'm going to do what's right for my family." He was very, very adamant that he was opposed to some of the things Mr. Trump was doing, like attacking the media. He felt that that was wrong. And it was a very, very serious Michael Cohen that I met with this morning about he was in a situation he feels he was unfairly thrust upon.
So, Rev, as a man of the cloth, you know that that idea of doing what's right for your country and what's doing right by your family aren't always the same thing. Was there any sense of what he meant by that? Because doing right by the country is coming out and telling everybody exactly what happened, and doing right by your family is the thing that's going to keep you out of jail.
Well, that's exactly what I counseled, and I think that is exactly what he said he was going to do. We didn't get into what that truth is, but clearly I got the impression that whatever he knows, he is going to be forthcoming. Now, how that will be, whether that's cooperation with the those that are saying that Mr. Trump has done things or not, we'll see. But I think the fact that, Ali, out of all of the people that he could have reached out to, reaching out to me in and of itself was sending a signal to President Trump and probably the prosecutors that he was not one that would not deal with someone who's been fighting Donald Trump for decades on social justice issues.
So what does this do? I'm trying to get a sense of this, Rev, because you, everybody who knows you knows where you stand on political issues and where you are, and that's generally not in the same place that Donald Trump is. But Michael Cohen has reached out to you. He reached out to George Stephanopoulos. Not a lot of people, but interesting choices. What do you think was behind this outreach?
I think that part of it is sending a signal that he is not the guy that's going to just be lockstep with Trump. Stephanopoulos was a leading Democratic operative. I've been, since he's known me and remained a leader of a civil rights organization that has opposed a lot of what Trump did. When Trump was a Democrat, he used to come to our civil rights organization, and Michael Cohen knows that. I think he was sending that signal, and I also think he wanted to talk to people that he had conferred with, even if we politically disagreed down through the years, to give them a sense he was a decent family guy and that he was going to do what was right, and we're going to see what that is.
Rev, I got to ask you, not to be colloquial about it, was he looking for your blessing?
I don't know that he was looking for my blessing as much as he was looking to explain himself. I was looking to find out, first of all, I didn't know what to expect. I was looking to find out what he wanted to say and eventually say that we were available to help him do that in public. And we said we would stay in touch. I told him that I was going to tweet publicly that we had met because I wasn't doing anything that I was not going to make a public record of, even though there were many people in the restaurant that knew who we were. And he even tweeted about the meeting. So what his motive was, I don't know. I know what he said, and what I sensed from him was he really is trying to be very clear that he's independent of Mr. Trump and that he's going to tell the truth, whatever that truth is, and he's going to protect his family, and he wants to stand up for the country. He kept saying that over and over again. He said the country is very divided, Rev. He says this is awful, and I want to stand up, and I don't want to be remembered as one that tried to do anything other than the right thing.
What a remarkable set of developments on a day that was already full of remarkable developments. Rev, good to see you as always, sir. Reverend Al Sharpton, whose show Politics Nation airs this Sunday at 8 a.m. Thanks for making time tonight.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.